Let's talk about the blood clotting mechanism. Now, if I've hurt myself, blood is flowing out. If I continue to lose that blood, I might develop anemia. And so, in such a case, blood flow has to be prevented. So, such a process is what is called as blood clotting or coagulation. Now, blood clotting is going to be mediated, or two important things which are present for this process to happen are the thrombocytes or the platelets and also proteins. Now, specifically, these proteins involved in blood clotting, we call them as clotting factors. So, we need to understand the clotting factors. So, let's look at them. There are 12 clotting factors, and we need to know them by name and also by number. So we can simply use this one. Imagine you have Christmas, and then after Christmas, you start climbing long slopes. What happens? You are going to fall because a lot of people have fallen. So we are going to use this mnemonic. Foolish people try climbing long slopes after Christmas. Some people have fallen. As simple as that. So the blood clotting factors with number and also the name. Number one is fibrinogen, followed by prothrombin, tissue factor, calcium ion. The labor factor, which is also called proacceleratin, and then we have got the stable factor, also called proconvertin. We have got the antihemophilic factor, Christmas factor, Stewart factor, plasma, thromboplastin antecedent, and then Hedgeman factor and fibrin stabilizing factor. The Christmas factor is also called plasma thromboplastin component. It is different from the plasma thromboplastin antecedent. All right. So these are the clotting factors. It looks hard, right? Don't worry, we're going to break it down. So if we look now, we need also to understand where each one of these factors are produced. Now, one thing that I want us to notice is that we don't have clotting factor number 6. Simply from 1 up to 13, but number 6 does not exist. That is why we are saying we have got 12 clotting factors, but they go from 1 up to 13. 12 of them because we don't have 6. All right. So the clotting factors, most of them, or let me say, a lot of them are produced in the liver except two. And those two we have got clotting factor number 3, which is also called tissue factor. That one is produced in tissue cells, just like you can hear from the name tissue factor. And then we have got the calcium. Okay, the calcium, just these two which follow themselves. Calcium, we know we've been talking about body fluid compartments and such. So, calcium, for us to know, is produced in plasma and not in the liver. Now, all these which remain are produced in the liver. Now, just to add on the proacceleratin, which is also called the stable factor, or let me say the labor factor. Okay, labor factor is also called proacceleratin. This one is produced also in platelets. Also, to go to the antihemophilic factor, factor number 8, it is also produced in lung capillaries. And then the last one, which is the fibrin stabilizing factor, it is also produced in bone marrow. So this is where they are produced. Now, there is this one which we are calling as the antihemophilic factor, which is the factor number 8. So what happens is that when you have got its deficiency, the deficiency of factor 8 is going to result in hemophilia A, just like the name hemophilic antihemophilic factor. So its deficiency results into hemophilia type A. Now we are going to skip, okay, from the hemophilic factor, antihemophilic factor, which is factor number 8, we go to factor number 9. If you don't have factor number 9, that is going to give hemophilia B. And then we skip 10, we'll go to 11, you are going to have hemophilia C. So simply, antihemophilic factor deficiency gives you hemophilia A. And then the next factor, which is 9, gives you hemophilia B. Skip 10, go to 11, it will give you hemophilia C in its deficiency. All right. So we are going to understand really their functions. Now, let's go into the blood clotting pathway itself. So we have got three pathways for blood clotting, or the three coagulation pathways. We have got the intrinsic pathway, extrinsic pathway, and the common pathway. Starting with the intrinsic pathway. Now, just the word intrinsic, meaning inside. So, for the intrinsic pathway, it's going to be initiated by the exposure of blood to negatively charged surfaces, such as collagen in the damaged body vessel or blood vessel. So I'm going to use this diagram to describe this process, the intrinsic pathway. Now, intrinsic, it is happening to the inside. So your blood vessel just inside, you might not be hit from the outside, just your blood vessel inside has been hit. So the blood vessels contain collagen because collagen is a connective tissue. So collagen is going to be exposed. Normally, collagen is not supposed to be exposed. Or even the endothelium of your cells have been exposed, which are not supposed to be exposed. So what then is going to happen if these have been exposed? So what happens is that you are just simply going to start from 12. Clotting factor number 12, you go to clotting factor number 11, and then you are going to, please, we're going to skip number 10. So number 10, we are going to remove it. Okay, so remove 10, just start from 12. So from 12, you go to 11, skip 10, you go to 8, and sorry, not 8, but 9, and then you go to 8. So this is how it's going to flow. Clotting clotting factor number 12 is going to be activated. So the clotting factor is going to be activated by contact, like the collagen has been exposed. That exposure is going to activate clotting factor 12 to clotting factor 12A. A just means activated. And then the clotting factor 12A is now going to activate 11 to 11A. 11 simply means activated. Clotting factor 11 is going to activate 9 to 9A. Now here though we can see it, clotting factor 9 is going to activate 8 to 8A. This is the one which you are able to see here. So simply 12 to 12A, 11 to 11A, 9 to 9A, 8 to 8A. And then the 8A is now going to act in conversion of factor 10 to factor 10A. All right, so that is how it moves. 12, 12A, 11, 11A, 9, 9A, 8, 8A, and then 8A converts 10 to 10A. Right. And then now this 10, this is where we are going to end. So for the intrinsic pathway, we simply go from 12 to 12A, 11 to 11A, 9 to 9A, 8 to 8A. That is the intrinsic pathway. So it is just involved how many uh, these clotting factors. We have got 12, we have got 11, we have got 9, we have got 8. Those are the ones which are involved. So I'm not going to first talk about what we are able to see down here. Now the next pathway is called the extrinsic pathway. So for the extrinsic pathway, is going to be initiated by the release of tissue factor. Now my tissue has been damaged. For the first one is just a blood vessel. That's why I'm calling it intrinsic. It is just happening inside. All right. So my tissue has been damaged. And so when a tissue has been damaged, factor 3, which we call the tissue factor, is going to be exposed. Okay. So when factor 3 is going to be exposed, it's going to be released. Remember, the tissue has been first hit. Factor 3, which is the tissue factor, just very simple, just as it says, is going to be released to where from the damaged cell into the blood system. When this tissue factor has been released into the blood system, that is going to be a sign to the platelets to say there is something wrong somewhere. So then what is going to happen? You have got a tissue factor that is going to be released when there is a break in a blood vessel, because this is coming from the outside anyway. You hurt yourself and then it breaks a blood vessel. So when the tissue factor has been released, the tissue factor is going to do something. It is going to convert one, which we call factor 7, to factor 7A. So the extrinsic just involves two things. You are going to have factor 3 being released. Factor 3 is going to convert factor 7 into factor 7A. So that is basically what is happening. All right. So just that. Factor 7 into factor 7A. So we can see now from this from this representation. We have got tissue injury. From tissue injury, we are going to have tissue factor being released. Okay, and then this tissue factor is going to convert the factor 7 to factor 7A. A just means activated. Now the conversion of factor 3, the process by which factor 3 is going to convert factor 7 to 7A involves some calcium. So basically extrinsic is just factor 3 which has been released, and then factor 3 converts 7 to 7A, just that. And then now we're going to have the common pathway. The common pathway is the one which joins the extrinsic and the intrinsic pathways. So then this is what we are going to have. On the extrinsic pathway, we have activated factor 10 into factor 10A. So basically this is what is happening for both pathways. So when we release factor 3 converts factor 7 into 7A. That 7A is now going to activate 10 into 10A, just like 8A also activated 10 into 10A. Now here it is 7A which is activating 10 into 10A. Now we already have 10A which has been formed. So the extrinsic is going to convert factor 10 to 10A. The extrinsic also the same. Intrinsic and extrinsic, they all convert 10 to 10A. And then now that will give us a common pathway. Right? So for the common pathway, this 10A which has been activated now converts prothrombin to thrombin. And prothrombin is factor 2, as we already talked about it. Prothrombin is factor 2. It is going to be activated to thrombin. Thrombin is simply the activated form of factor 2. So we call it factor 2A. All right. So basically what is happening is always when you activate this one, the activated form, you put an A. Now, the thrombin which has been formed is going to convert fibrinogen, which is factor 1, into fibrin, which is factor 1A. A just means activated. Now, the fibrin is the one which forms a mesh on the wound. This is the one which we saw from the beginning here. Okay? The fibrin is the one which forms this mesh on this wound like that. So it prevents the formation of, the movement of blood outside. Now, one thing we should note is that this fibrin is not that strong. Because it is not that strong, you need to strengthen it. That is why we have got the next factor, which is called factor 13, to just strengthen this fibrin. So we call it the fibrin stabilizing factor. So that is the coagulation pathway. That is the coagulation pathway. So simply, what are we having? We have got the extrinsic and the intrinsic. They are going to activate factor 10 to factor 10A. Factor 10A, now it doesn't work alone. Factor 10A together with also, if you can see on both pathways, I'm not talked about factor 5. I've not talked about factor 4. So factor 5 and factor 4, let me just show those. Okay. So factor 5 is the labor factor, and then factor 4 is the calcium. I've not talked about this, but I've talked about the rest. What do we think? Where do these work? So these two are going to work together with the in the common pathway together with the factor 10. So what happens is that when we have activated factor 10 to factor 10A, the calcium also comes in, that is factor 4. Also the factor 5. Okay, factor 5, which is the activated form, factor 5 activated. So on this portion here, we're going to have factor 10, factor 5A, which has been activated already. We also have what? We also have factor 4, which is the calcium. Apart from that, we also have lipoproteins. So what do we have? Factor 10A, factor 5A, and then factor 4, which is calcium and lipoproteins. And that forms now what we call the prothrombin complex. So that is a complex that converts prothrombin to thrombin. And then thrombin converts fibrinogen to fibrin. And then fibrin is now going to be stabilized by fibrin stabilizing factor. So this is the process of blood coagulation, extrinsic, intrinsic, and the common pathway. On the intrinsic, we have got factor 12 into factor 12A. What made the conversion of factor 12 into factor 12A? It was the collagen which was exposed. The collagen exposed activates factor 12 to factor 12A. Factor 12A converts factor 11 to 11A. 11A converts 9 to 9A. 9A converts 8 to 8A. Now the 8A converts now factor 10 to factor 10A. That is intrinsic. On the extrinsic, you have exposed your tissue. So that exposed tissue is going to release factor 3. Factor 3 converts factor 7 to 7A. Factor 7A converts 10 into 10A. And then the 10A now goes on the common path. Factor 10A together with 5A and calcium, which is factor 4, and lipoproteins form what we call the prothrombin complex. Prothrombin complex converts prothrombin to thrombin. Prothrombin is factor 3 and then goes to thrombin, which is factor 2. The prothrombin is factor 2, goes into thrombin, which is factor 2 activated. The thrombin is the one which converts fibrinogen into fibrin. Fibrinogen is factor 1 into fibrin, and then the fibrin is supposed to be strengthened. So factor 13 is the one which comes down here, fibrin stabilizing factor 13. So that is it for this tutorial. Thank you so much for watching. See you in the next tutorial.